Welcome back, dear listener. When we left off, we were in the midst of discussing the battle between the Old Ones and the Citan, with the former frantically sowing the seeds of life and nurturing warriors to combat the overwhelming might of the enriched latter. And so that is where we shall resume. The tide turns. The Old Ones' psychically empowered servant species spread across the galaxy, battling the advanced Necron technology with the psychic power of their warp-spawned magic. Facing this new onslaught, the Citan's empire was shattered, as the psychic forces of the Immaterium were anathema to soulless entities whose existence was wholly contained within purely physical patterns of electromagnetic force. For all the destruction they could unleash, they were unable to stop the Old Ones and the younger race's relentless advance across the stars. The remaining Citan, unified by this great threat for the first time in millions of Terran years, sought a way to defeat the soul-fueled energies of the younger species. They initiated a great warding, a plan to forever defeat the psychic sorceries of the Old Ones by sealing off the material universe from the warp. A plan whose first fruits could once be found on the imperial fortress world of Cadia, in the form of the great pylons that littered the surface of that world in intricate networks and create the area of space-time stability near the Eye of Terror, known as the Cadian Gate. With their godlike powers, it was only a matter of time until the Citan succeeded. But before their great work was complete, the seeds of destruction the Old Ones had planted millennia before brought about an unforeseen cataclysm. The growing pains and collective psychic flaws of the younger species threw the untapped, psychically reactive energies of the Immaterium into disorder. War, pain, and destruction were mirrored in the bottomless depth of the Sea of Souls that was the Warp. The maelstrom of souls unleashed into the Immaterium by the carnage of the war in heaven coalesced in the previously formless energies of the Warp. Older entities that had existed within the Immaterium transformed into terrifying psychic predators, tearing at the souls of vulnerable psychers as their own environment was torn apart and reforged into the realm of chaos. Enslaver Plague. The denizens of the Warp, stirred into a frenzy by the conflict in the Materium, clustered voraciously at the cracks between the Immaterium and the material universe, seeking new ways to enter the physical realm. The Old Ones brought forth new genetically engineered warrior species to defend their last strongholds, including the technology-mimicking Jokaero and the formidable green-skinned Krork, who were the ancestors of the present-day Orcs. But it was already too late. The Old Ones' intergalactic webway network was breached from the Immaterium and lost to them. Several of their warp gates were destroyed by their own hands to prevent the entities of the warp from spreading to uncorrupted worlds, and the Old Ones' greatest works and places of power were overrun by the horrors their own creations had unleashed. The most terrifying of these horrors were the enslavers, warp entities whose ability to dominate the minds of the younger species and create their own portals into the material realm using mutated, possessed psychers brought them forth in ever greater numbers. For the Old Ones, this was the final disaster as the enslavers took control of their servants. The Pandora's box, unleashed by the creation of the younger species, finally scattered the last of the Old Ones and broke their power over the galaxy once and for all. Life had stood at the edge of an apocalypse during the war in heaven between the Old Ones and the Citan. Now, as the enslavers breached the Immaterium in epidemic proportions, the survivors looked doomed. Ultimately, beset by the implacable onset of the Citan and the calamitous warp-spawned perils they had themselves mistakenly unleashed, the Old Ones were defeated, scattered, and finally destroyed. Whether the species went extinct or simply fled the galaxy to seek a new haven elsewhere is unknown. Silent King's betrayal. Throughout the final stages of the war in heaven, Sarek bided his time, waiting for the moment in which the Citan would prove most vulnerable. Though the entire Necron species was now his to command, the Silent King could not hope to oppose the Citan at the height of their power. And even if he did, and met with success, the Necrons would then have to finish the war in heaven against the Old Ones and their increasingly potent allied species alone. No, the Old Ones had to be completely and utterly defeated before the Citan could be brought to account for the horror they had wrought among the Necrontyr. And so, when the Citan finally won their great war, their triumph was short-lived. With one hated enemy finally defeated and the other spent from hard-fought victory, the Silent King at last led the Necrons in revolt. In their arrogance, the Citan did not realize their danger until it was too late. The Necrons focused the unimaginable energies of the living universe into weapons, god-killing hypercannons devised by the finest cryptex in the galaxy, too mighty for even the star gods to endure. Not even the great overlords of the Necron crown worlds well remember the battles against the star gods, for causality itself was damaged by the forces unleashed to dismember the Citan, and the Silent King was wont to remove the knowledge of the dreadful weapons employed from his warriors after the fact in fear of what might later be done with them. Alas, the Citan were immortal starspawn, part of the fundamental fabric of reality, and therefore nigh impossible to destroy. So was each Citan instead sundered into thousands of smaller and less powerful energetic fragments, each with the personality of the whole entity. Yet this outcome was sufficient to the Silent King's goals. Indeed, he had known the Citan's ultimate destruction to be impossible, and had drawn his plans accordingly. Each newborn Citan shard was bound within a multidimensional tesseract labyrinth, as trammeled and secured as a legendary Terran djinn trapped in a bottle. Though the cost of victory was high, millions of Necrons had been destroyed as a consequence of their rebellion, including all of the members of the Triarch save the Silent King himself. The Necrons were once more in command of their own destiny. Great sleep. The Necrons had been vindicated in their pursuit only of science and control over the material realm, and certainly took pleasure in seeing the Old One's civilization collapse, as a result of their overindulgence of psychic power and the end of the Citan's domination over their species. Yet even with the defeat of the Old Ones and the Citan alike, the Silent King saw that the time of the Necrons in the galaxy was over, for the moment at least. They would allow the enslavers to take what was left of the intelligent life in the galaxy and let it become an interstellar wasteland. The Psyker swarm would then die away, and in time the galaxy would evolve new life forms who would be less sophisticated and easier to dominate. In addition, the Necrons understood that the mantle of galactic dominion was soon to pass to the Eldari, one of the psychically potent species that had fought alongside the Old Ones throughout the War in Heaven and had thus come to hate the Necrons and all their works. With the burning passion that is the defining characteristic of that species, the Eldari had survived where the Old Ones had not, and the Necrons, weakened by their expenditure of lives and resources in overthrowing the rule of the Citan, could not stand against them. Yet the Silent King knew that the time of the Eldari would eventually pass, as it must pass for all those beings still cloaked in flesh. It would take millions of Terran years for the Eldari's power to fade. But what mattered is that the Necrons would be there to take advantage of it. So it was that the Silent King ordered the remaining Necron cities to be transformed into great tomb complexes, threaded with stasis crypts. Let the Eldari shape the galaxy for a time. They were but ephemeral, whilst the Necrons were undying and eternal. The Silent King's final command to his people was that they must sleep for the equivalent of 60 million standard years, but awake ready to rebuild all that they had lost, to restore the Necron dynasties to their former glory. This was the Silent King's final order, and as the last tomb world sealed its subterranean vaults, Zarek destroyed the engrammatic command protocols by which he had controlled his people for so long, for he had failed them utterly. Without a backward glance, Zarek, the last of the Silent Kings of the Triarch, took ship into the starless void of intergalactic space, there to find whatever measure of solace or penance he could. Meanwhile, aeons passed and the Necrons slept on, their machine slaves and constructs guarding them while they slept on tomb worlds that had been purged of all life to keep the enslavers from their door. This plan worked with an amazing degree of success until the Necrons were awakened by the forces of the Imperium of Man in the 41st millennium to plague the galaxy once more. They discovered a new and unexpected age of interstellar civilization, and war much like the one they had left behind 60 million standard years before. The galaxy is blossoming with life once more, but is still overrun with latent psychers and worshippers of the infernal chaos warp energies, first unleashed during the War in Heaven. It will take time and a great many machinations for the Necron dynasties to regain their rightful place as the rulers of the galaxy. The agents of chaos must be overthrown, the dangerous Eldari, inheritors of the Old One's mantle, eliminated, humanity subjugated, and the great work cutting off the material universe from the warp completed, before a new age of Necron dominion can truly begin. But the Necrons are ageless and undying, their technology still unmatched by any of the younger starfaring species, and time is always on their side. That concludes this chapter, dear listener. and your patience will soon be rewarded, for when we next reconvene, it shall be to discuss the rise of the most holy of species, blessed humanity.